He was a quiet boy, always keeping to himself, walking through life like a shadow people barely noticed. His neighborhood was small and simple, with narrow streets and houses that had seen better days. But even in that modest world, he found a kind of beauty everywhere: the rustling of leaves, the sound of rain hitting the roof, and most of all, the music that lived inside him. From a very young age, he had loved the piano. The way the keys felt under his fingers, the way a single note could make him feel calm or happy, made him forget all the teasing and the whispers that followed him wherever he went. School was never easy. The other kids could be cruel without even thinking about it. They laughed at the way he dressed, the way he spoke, even the way he smiled. He learned quickly that showing any sign of pride or talent could become a target. But still, he carried his love for music quietly in his heart. He spent hours imagining what it would feel like to play in front of others, to make them stop laughing and actually listen. The thought both scared and excited him. One day, the school announced a talent show. Posters were put up everywhere, and students started talking about who would perform. Some boasted about their singing or dancing, while others joked about who would embarrass themselves. He hesitated at first, watching and listening. Part of him wanted to sign up, to finally step into a world where he could show what he had inside. Another part of him was terrified that the laughter would only grow louder, that he would fail in front of everyone, that he would become the joke of the school. Still, he couldn't resist the call of the piano. With shaking hands, he went to the teacher and asked if he could participate. The teacher looked at him with surprise, a little unsure. "Are you sure?" the teacher asked. "It's a big stage, lots of people will be watching." He nodded, his heart racing. "I want to try," he said softly. That was all it took. He was signed up, and the moment he walked back to his classroom, whispers followed him like shadows by the next day. The news spread through the school like wildfire. "Did you hear? He's going to play the piano." Some students whispered, giggling. "He can't even play properly." Others snickered. He heard it, of course, and it hurt, but he tried to ignore it. Deep down, he knew this was his chance. He had spent countless nights alone at the piano, practicing in silence, dreaming of a moment like this. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn the laughter into something else. At home, he looked at the old piano sitting in the corner. It wasn't new or fancy. Some keys stuck, and it sometimes sounded a little off, but to him it was perfect. Every night after school, he would sit at it, pressing the keys gently at first, then with more confidence. He didn't have formal lessons, didn't have expensive sheet music, but he had something stronger: determination. He would close his eyes and imagine the crowd, imagine them leaning in, listening, captivated by each note. The music became his friend, his teacher, and his shield against the world that seemed so quick to laugh at him. The days passed slowly as the talent show approached. In school, the teasing didn't stop. Some students would tap on the desk and mock piano sounds, laughing as if the joke was already over before it even began. Others whispered behind his back, making faces that stung more than words. He walked past them, head down, but each time he sat at the piano at home, he felt a spark of something growing inside him, something stronger than fear. He practiced harder, trying to make each note perfect, letting the music tell the story he couldn't put into words. When the night of the talent show finally came, he felt a knot in his stomach, the kind that made his hands sweat and his heart pound like a drum. The auditorium was full of students, teachers, and parents. He could hear laughter and whispers as he walked on stage. They didn't know him. They only knew what they had decided he was worth: a joke, a laughing stock. But he sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. For a moment, the world disappeared. There was only the music, only the keys, only him. He pressed the first note. It was soft, almost fragile, but it carried a weight that surprised even him. The laughter from the audience began to fade, replaced by curious silence. He didn't stop. He let his fingers move as if they had a mind of their own. Each chord, each melody, was filled with all the things he had kept inside for years: his fears, his hopes, his dreams, and the quiet pride that he had never allowed anyone to see, even though the talent show had only just begun. Something was changing in that room. People were leaning forward, ears straining, eyes widening. The boy who had been mocked, laughed at, and underestimated was slowly turning the story into his own. And as the music floated through the auditorium, it became clear that this night would be remembered not for the teasing, but for something much greater, something that had waited quietly inside him all along. After the talent show announcement, he felt a mixture of excitement and fear. At home, the old piano waited in the corner of the living room, silent but full of promise. It wasn't a perfect piano. Some of the keys were sticky and a few notes sounded off, but to him it was more than enough. It had been with his family for years, surviving moves, accidents, and neglect, just like him in many ways. Every time he sat down at it, he felt a connection he could not explain. The music was like a friend who listened without judgment, who never laughed at his mistakes, and who let him dream freely. Every day after school, he ran home, eager to practice. He would sit at the piano and start slowly, pressing each key carefully, feeling the vibration of each note. Sometimes he played melodies he had made up himself, soft and simple yet full of emotion. Other times he tried to imitate pieces he had heard on the radio or online. He didn't have a teacher or formal lessons, so he watched videos, listened closely, and repeated what he heard. His fingers became more confident, moving faster, stretching across the keys in ways that made the music richer and more alive. He practiced late into the night. While other kids his age were watching TV or playing video games, he was alone with his piano. The house was quiet except for the sound of music and sometimes the faint creak of the floorboards under his weight. Neighbors would occasionally hear the notes drifting through the walls, but no one complained. His music carried feelings he could never put into words. Each night, he felt a little braver, a little stronger. Each note he played became a small victory against the doubts that surrounded him. At school, the teasing continued. Some classmates would mimic the piano, tapping on desks and making silly noises, thinking they were clever. Others whispered behind his back, calling him names or saying he would embarrass himself on stage. It hurt, but he learned to walk past them without looking down. He imagined their laughter turning into applause. He imagined the moment when they would finally see what he was capable of. The thought kept him going. The teasing became background. Noise almost meaningless compared to the music in his heart. Sometimes he doubted himself. Sometimes he felt that maybe the other kids were right, that he might fail, that the audience might laugh even louder than usual. On those nights, he would sit at the piano and close his eyes, letting his fingers move without thinking, letting the music remind him why he loved it. He remembered why he started, why he couldn't stop. Every mistake became a lesson, every stumble a step closer to being ready. Slowly, he began to trust himself more. Slowly, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference with his music. He also began to experiment. He tried combining different styles, mixing melodies he liked from classical music with rhythms he had heard in songs on the radio. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. He learned to listen carefully, to hear the mistakes, and to try again. It was not about being perfect. It was about expressing something real. His piano became a mirror of his emotions, his frustration, his joy, his sadness, and his hope. Every key he pressed was a piece of him, and that thought gave him courage. His family noticed the change in him. They had always supported him quietly, proud of his dedication even if they didn't always understand it. His mother would peek in from the kitchen and smile when she heard him play. "You're getting better," she said one evening. "I can hear it." Those words meant more to him than any compliment from classmates or teachers. At home, he felt safe to explore, safe to make mistakes, safe to grow. His piano became not just an instrument, but a home for his dreams. The days grew closer to the talent show, and he started to feel nervous. He would imagine standing on stage in front of the audience. He could hear the whispers, see the skeptical faces, feel the tension in the room. It scared him, but he refused to let it stop him. He practiced the songs he planned to play over and over again. He worked on every detail, how to press the keys, how to control the volume, how to make the music flow naturally. He even practiced in front of the mirror, imagining the audience watching him, imagining their eyes on him, imagining their laughter turning into silence. There were moments when he felt alone in his journey. None of his classmates understood the hours he spent at the piano, the struggle of learning by himself, or the fear he carried about performing. Some nights he cried quietly, frustrated that it felt like the world was against him. But even in those moments he would return to the piano. The music reminded him that he was not truly alone. The piano listened, comforted, and challenged him all at once. It demanded his best, but it also gave him strength. He began to notice small changes. His fingers moved more fluidly across the keys. The melodies he played sounded more confident, more alive. He could feel the rhythm in his chest, the flow in his hands, the emotion in each note. The music started to feel like an extension of himself, like he was telling a story without saying a word. The more he played, the more he believed that one day, people might listen, not just hear, but truly listen, and maybe they would understand. He also started to feel excitement. The talent show was approaching, and while the fear of being laughed at still lingered, there was also a spark of hope. What if he surprised everyone? What if his music made them stop talking, stop laughing, and just feel? The thought filled him with energy. Each practice session became a small rehearsal, a preparation for the moment he had been waiting for his whole life. His heart raced when he imagined the stage, but he reminded himself that the music was stronger than fear. Night, before he went to bed, he would sit quietly at the piano one last time, letting his hands move freely. He would close his eyes and imagine the audience falling silent, imagining the beauty of the music filling the room. The laughter, the whispers, the doubt, they all disappeared in those moments. It was just him, the piano, and the music that had become his voice. Those quiet nights gave him courage, and he began to believe that maybe the day of the talent show would not be a day of embarrassment, but a day of triumph. By the time the talent show arrived, he felt ready in a way he never had before. Not confident in the sense that he expected no mistakes, but ready in the sense that he had prepared. He had practiced, he had poured his heart into the music. Whatever happened, he knew he had already come a long way. The music had taught him patience, resilience, and the power of expressing himself, even when others doubted him. And so, with each practice, with each note, he grew stronger. The boy, who had once been afraid of laughter, who had walked through school carrying the weight of mockery, had found a quiet strength in the piano. He had learned that talent alone was not enough. Determination, courage, and love for what you do mattered more. The piano had become his voice, his shield, and his hope. And as he prepared for the big day, he knew one thing for certain. The music he had nurtured in silence was about to speak louder than anyone had ever imagined. The day of the talent show finally arrived. From the moment he woke up, his stomach was tied in knots, and his heart beat faster than it had ever done before. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow sharper. At home, he barely spoke to anyone. He ate a little breakfast, ran his fingers over the keys of the old piano one last time, and tried to calm himself. His parents watched quietly, proud but aware that nothing they said could truly soothe the nerves building inside him. When he arrived at school, the auditorium was buzzing with energy. Students ran around, talking loudly, joking, laughing, and showing off. Parents and teachers filled the seats, chatting and taking pictures. He could feel the eyes of people on him as he walked past, and even before he stepped on stage, he knew some were already laughing, ready to see him fail. He tried to ignore them, focusing on the piano, waiting for him backstage. It looked ordinary to everyone else, but to him, it was everything. Backstage, he could hear the applause for other performers. Singers, dancers, and even a small magic act received cheers and claps. Each sound made his anxiety grow, but it also strengthened his resolve. He had practiced for months, poured his heart into every note, and now it was time to let the music speak for him. He took a deep breath, ran his fingers over the keys one more time, and walked onto the stage. The moment he appeared, a few snickers came from the audience. Some students whispered to each other, already making jokes. But he held his head high and walked toward the piano. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the doubt in their eyes, and the laughter waiting to erupt. For a second he hesitated, his hands shaking as he reached for the keys. Then he reminded himself of all the nights he had spent alone, practicing, learning, and dreaming. The music was stronger than the fear. He sat down, adjusted the bench, and closed his eyes. He let the silence fill him, listening to the sound of the auditorium, the murmurs, and the faint squeak of the floorboards. Then slowly he pressed the first key. The note was soft, almost fragile, but it held something unexpected, something that made the laughter pause. He pressed another, then another, letting the music flow naturally, without forcing it. Each note was careful, deliberate, and filled with emotion. At first, a few whispers ran through the audience. "Is he really going to play?" someone asked quietly. "He's not even that good," another said. But as he continued, something began to change. The music started to fill the room, gentle at first, then growing stronger, more confident, more alive. The sound seemed to carry a story of patience, struggle, and hope that no one had expected. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn in, listening more closely than they ever had. He opened his eyes for a moment and saw the faces in the crowd. The smirks were fading. The whispers were slowing down. Even the teachers who had looked skeptical were staring, surprised at the talent coming from someone they had underestimated. He felt a surge of energy and confidence, not from pride, but from the realization that the music was working, it was reaching them. Each note became a bridge between him and the audience, connecting them in a way words never could. As he played, he let the music express everything he had kept hidden. His frustration with the teasing, his loneliness, his quiet determination, and his dream of being seen, all of it poured through the keys. He did not stop to think about mistakes or fear. His fingers moved with a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than himself, almost as if the piano had become an extension of his soul. The melodies rose and fell, soft and delicate, then powerful and bold, keeping everyone in the room spellbound. Time seemed to stretch. He lost track of the audience, the whispers, and even his own nervousness. There was only the music, each note guiding him, shaping the performance naturally. He remembered the nights when he had practiced in secret, the times he had doubted himself, and the quiet moments of triumph when a melody finally sounded just right. All of that experience came together in this one performance, and he could feel it resonating through every part of him. The laughter that had been waiting for him was gone. In its place was silence, the kind of silence that demanded attention, that made people hold their breath. Even the students who had been joking before were leaning forward, unable to look away. They could hear the skill, the passion, and the truth in his music. Every note spoke louder than words, telling a story of a boy who refused to be silenced, who had worked tirelessly to turn ridicule into beauty. He didn't rush. He allowed the music to flow naturally, giving each phrase its proper weight. When he played a quiet, gentle section, people leaned in to catch every note. When he reached the louder, more dramatic part, their eyes widened, feeling the power of the sound. The performance became more than just notes on a piano, it became an experience. The boy, once mocked and underestimated, had created a space where everyone had to listen, whether they wanted to or not. By the middle of the performance, the room had completely changed. The audience was no longer whispering or fidgeting. Parents, teachers, and students alike were captivated. Some had tears in their eyes, touched by the raw emotion he was conveying. Others were sitting rigidly, focused entirely on the music, realizing that they had been wrong to doubt him. Every note was a reminder that talent, dedication, and heart could overcome fear and ridicule. As the last part of his piece approached, he felt a calm settle over him. He had done it. He had shared his music, his story, and his soul with everyone in the room. The final notes were soft but full of meaning, lingering in the air like a breath of hope. He let the last key ring out, held it for a moment, and then slowly lifted his hands from the piano. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The room was still, as if no one could believe what they had just witnessed. Then, suddenly, the first clap came, hesitant at first, and then louder and louder. The applause grew until it filled the auditorium, echoing off the walls. Students who had laughed at him now stood, cheering. Teachers smiled proudly, some with tears in their eyes. Parents clapped and whistled, amazed at the courage and talent they had just seen. He had done it, he had silenced the doubt, and in its place had created something beautiful. He looked up at the crowd, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. The laughter that had haunted him for so long had been replaced by admiration and respect. In that moment, he realized something important. The music was not just for the audience, it was for him too. It had given him the power to stand tall, to overcome fear, and to show the world that he mattered. The boy who had once been shy, mocked, and underestimated had become the center of attention in the most incredible way. He had not only performed music, he had told his story, touched hearts, and changed minds. The piano, old and imperfect as it was, had helped him find his voice. And as the applause continued, he knew that this moment would stay with him forever. A reminder that courage, dedication, and passion could triumph over fear and ridicule. Even after the applause died down and the next performer walked on stage, the memory of his performance lingered. Students talked about it in whispers, some saying, "I didn't think he could do that," while others admitted, "He was amazing." Teachers praised his dedication, and parents asked about his practice, amazed at the skill he had developed on his own. The boy felt a quiet pride, not from showing off, but from knowing that he had stayed true to himself and his music. Backstage, he sat for a moment, letting his heart slow and his hands relax. The old piano, battered and worn, seemed to glow in a new way. It had carried him through months of practice, through doubt, fear, and ridicule, and had finally helped him shine. He knew there would be challenges ahead, more obstacles, more people who might not understand him. But he also knew that nothing could take away what he had achieved tonight. He had played with courage, heart, and honesty. And that was something no one could ever take away. As he left the stage, he smiled quietly to himself. The music had spoken louder than the laughter. For the first time, he felt fully seen, not for what others thought he was, but for who he truly was. And in that moment, he realized that this was only the beginning. The piano, the music, and his determination would carry him forward, helping him face whatever came next with confidence, hope, and the knowledge that his voice mattered. After the last note hung in the air, the room stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. The audience was frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. The boy had played with a level of skill and emotion that no one had expected. The snickers, whispers, and laughter that had followed him for months were gone, replaced by stunned attention. People didn't know what to say at first. Some mouths hung open in shock, while others had tears quietly rolling down their cheeks. For the first time, he realized the power of his music. It could speak louder than words. Louder than ridicule, louder than fear, he sat at the piano, hands resting lightly on the keys, heart racing, unsure whether to breathe or just remain in that moment forever. Slowly, the audience began to react. The first claps were soft, tentative, as if someone was testing whether this was real. Then more joined in, until the applause grew louder and louder, echoing through the auditorium. Students who had mocked him earlier were standing, some with wide eyes, realizing they had completely misjudged him. The laughter had disappeared, replaced by admiration, respect, and even a touch of humility. Teachers who had been skeptical before now looked at him differently. Their faces were a mixture of surprise and pride. Some whispered to each other, acknowledging his dedication, talent, and courage. "He really is incredible," one murmured. Parents, too, were clapping, some on their feet, cheering for a boy who had dared to face fear and judgment and had turned it into something beautiful. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had been expected to be a moment of embarrassment had become a moment of inspiration. He finally stood up, still feeling the tremor of nerves and excitement running through him. The applause didn't stop. Students came forward, shaking their heads, murmuring apologies for doubting him. Some admitted they had laughed too quickly, not realizing the effort and passion behind his music. He smiled quietly, accepting their recognition without pride or arrogance. What mattered wasn't the applause, it was that he had stayed true to himself and his music. And in doing so, had changed the minds of everyone in that room. Even as the applause continued, he noticed a few students wiping tears from their eyes. Some had been teased themselves or had struggled with feeling invisible, and they saw a reflection of their own experiences in his courage. The music had not only silenced the laughter, but it had also created a connection. People weren't just listening, they were feeling, understanding, and empathizing. It was a quiet, powerful moment, the kind that stayed with people long after they left the room. He walked off the stage slowly, allowing himself a moment to absorb everything that had happened. Backstage, he was met with hugs, handshakes, and congratulations. Teachers praised his dedication and skill, and classmates who had once laughed at him were now sincere in their admiration. Some were speechless, unable to find words to express how moved they had been. Others were smiling widely, clapping him on the shoulder, and telling him how proud they were to have witnessed something so extraordinary. The boy's heart swelled with emotion, but it wasn't pride in a selfish sense. It was a quiet joy, the kind that comes from knowing that your hard work, your passion, and your courage have made a real difference. He had faced fear, ridicule, and doubt, and had come out the other side stronger. He had shown everyone, including himself, that determination and love for what you do can overcome the harshest judgment. The music had been his voice, and it had spoken louder than anyone could have imagined. Later, when he returned to his seat in the audience area, he noticed how the atmosphere had changed. People were talking quietly, replaying the performance in their minds. Teachers discussed how much time and effort he must have put into learning and perfecting the piece. Students, once skeptical, were now inspired, realizing that talent often hides in the most unexpected places. Even the principal, who had been watching from the back, nodded with respect. Clearly impressed by what had just occurred, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the long nights at the piano, the fear, the doubt, the teasing, and the persistence. It all led to this one night when he had the courage to let his talent shine, no matter what others thought. He understood something important: the applause, the recognition, and the surprise of others were temporary. But the growth inside him, the confidence he had gained, and the knowledge that he could face fear and succeed were permanent. Over the next few days, the story of his performance spread quickly. Students talked about it in the hallways, some expressing admiration, others regret for underestimating him. Teachers shared the story during classes, using it as an example of dedication, courage, and the power of following one's passion. Parents discussed it with friends and family, amazed that a boy who had seemed so quiet and unassuming could create such an impact with his music. Everywhere he went, he was met with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and newfound admiration. Despite all the attention, he remained humble. He understood that what mattered most wasn't the recognition or the applause, but the journey he had taken to get there. The countless hours at the piano, the mistakes he had made and learned from, the moments of doubt he had overcome, they were what made the performance meaningful. The audience had seen the result, but he had lived the process. And in living it, he had grown, not only as a musician, but as a person capable of facing fear and turning it into strength. Even the students who had been the harshest critics began to approach him differently. Some apologized for laughing, some admitted they had misjudged him, and others simply nodded with newfound respect. The boy accepted these gestures with quiet gratitude, not seeking revenge or validation, but understanding that this moment had changed more than just his own life. It had changed how people saw him, and perhaps how they would see others who dared to follow their passion. The music lingered in the minds of everyone who had listened. People would recall not just the notes, but the emotion, the courage, and the story behind them. The boy had shown that talent combined with persistence and heart could not be ignored. He had proven that even someone underestimated by the world could create a moment that touched hearts and changed perspectives. The applause, the admiration, and the awe were all signs of a simple truth: courage and dedication, expressed through passion, can break through doubt and fear. By the end of the day, as the talent show concluded and people began to leave, he remained seated quietly, reflecting on what had happened. The sense of achievement was deep and satisfying, but more than that, he felt a quiet peace. The music had given him a voice that no one could take away, a confidence that would carry him forward, and a lesson that he would never forget. No matter how others see you, the power to define yourself comes from within. As he walked home that evening, he thought about the piano waiting in his living room. It was more than just an instrument now, it was a symbol of all that he had overcome, a reminder of courage, practice, and the beauty of expressing oneself honestly. He knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, and more moments of doubt, but he also knew that if he faced them with the same dedication and heart, he could overcome anything. That night, before going to bed, he sat quietly at the piano one last time. He played a simple melody, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for himself. Each note was a reminder of the journey, of the fear he had faced, and of the triumph he had achieved. In the quiet of his room, he smiled, knowing that the music would always be with him, guiding him, comforting him, and giving him the courage to face whatever lay ahead. In that moment, he understood something profound. True talent is not about impressing others. It is about expressing yourself fully, honestly, and courageously. He had faced a room full of doubt and fear and turned it into admiration and respect. He had taken the laughter and whispers of others and transformed them into something meaningful. And as he closed his eyes, letting the final notes linger in the air, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had truly silenced the world, not with words, but with the power of his music. The days after the talent show were unlike anything the boy had ever experienced. Suddenly, people were looking at him differently. Classmates who had mocked him before now nodded with respect in the hallways, some whispering apologies, others quietly acknowledging his talent. Teachers approached him with smiles, praising not just his performance, but his dedication, courage, and the hard work that had led to it. Even parents of other students came up to him, expressing admiration and surprise at what he had accomplished. It felt strange at first, this new attention, but it was not empty, it was genuine, and it touched him deeply. At home, the piano seemed to shine differently, as if it knew the journey they had taken together. His parents were proud, though they did not overwhelm him with words. Instead, they let him feel the achievement on his own. His mother smiled quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder, and said, "You've worked so hard. We are proud of you always." Her words, simple yet sincere, made him feel both grounded and uplifted. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his efforts were recognized, not just by strangers, but by the people who mattered most. School life slowly changed for him. The teasing that had once been relentless disappeared almost overnight. Where there had been laughter and mockery, there was now curiosity and respect. Some students who had once dismissed him tried to learn more about his music, asking questions about how he had practiced, what pieces he liked, and how he had learned to play so beautifully. Others simply watched him differently, inspired by the courage it took to perform despite fear and ridicule. He realized that his actions had not only changed how people saw him, but also how they approached challenges in their own lives. The boy began to feel a new sense of confidence. It was not arrogance or pride, but a quiet assurance that he could face challenges and overcome them. He continued to practice diligently, exploring more complex pieces, experimenting with his own compositions, and letting the piano become a true reflection of his emotions. Each session reminded him of the talent, persistence, and patience that had brought him to this moment. He had learned that success was not just about natural ability, but about effort, courage, and the willingness to face fear head-on. Opportunities began to open up. Teachers recommended him for special music programs and local events. Some students invited him to play at school gatherings, and even community members asked him to perform at small recitals. With each new opportunity, he grew not only as a musician, but also as a person. He understood that talent alone was not enough. Discipline, humility, and heart were equally important. And with each performance, he carried the lesson that courage and dedication could inspire others. Not just entertain them, more importantly, he noticed how much he had changed internally. The boy who had once been quiet, shy, and afraid of judgment now carried a quiet strength. He no longer feared being laughed at or dismissed. Instead, he trusted himself, his abilities, and the music that had become his voice. Even when faced with doubt or uncertainty, he remembered the talent show, the fear, The preparation, the moment on stage, and the applause that followed, those memories reminded him that perseverance and belief in oneself could overcome even the harshest challenges. The story of the talent show spread beyond the school. People spoke of the boy who had silenced a crowd with his piano, who had turned mockery into admiration, and who had shown that true talent comes from heart, patience, and courage. The performance became an inspiration, especially for students who felt invisible, discouraged, or underestimated. Many realized that it was possible to turn doubt and criticism into motivation. He had shown them that persistence and passion could break through the barriers that life sometimes placed in their way. He also became more aware of the power of kindness and encouragement. Looking back, he remembered the moments when small gestures like a teacher's nod, a parent's quiet smile, or even the solitude of late-night practice had helped him continue when it was difficult. He began to offer the same encouragement to others, helping classmates with music, sharing advice and showing that support and patience could make a big difference. The boy realized that talent was not just about individual success, it was about lifting others, inspiring them, and creating a positive impact. Despite the attention and praise, he remained humble. He understood that his journey was still ongoing, that there were more challenges ahead, and that mastery of music and life required continuous effort. He focused on improving himself, not to prove others wrong, but to grow, to learn, and to express the depth of his emotions through the piano. Each note became more than sound. It became a reflection of his experiences, his struggles, and his triumphs. The piano was no longer just an instrument, it was a bridge to his heart, a way to connect with the world, and a source of endless learning. The boy's success also inspired his family. They saw how passion, persistence, and courage could transform not only his life but also their perception of what was possible. The piano, once just a piece of furniture, had become a symbol of hope, growth, and resilience. They encouraged him to continue exploring, to keep dreaming, and to trust in the power of dedication and heart. For them, the talent show was more than a performance. It was a moment of transformation for the entire family. As weeks turned into months, he continued to practice and perform, each time growing stronger, more confident, and more expressive. His music touched more people, inspiring them to pursue their own passions despite fear or criticism. And with every note, he remembered the journey, the moments of doubt, the nights of practice, the laughter of classmates, and the courage it had taken to sit on that stage. He knew that true success was not measured by applause alone, but by the personal growth and the lives he could inspire along the way. In school, he became an example of what was possible when talent meets dedication. Students who had once dismissed him now sought his advice. Teachers recommended him for more opportunities, and even parents looked to him as an example of perseverance and determination. Yet, he never forgot where he had started, the shy boy who loved music quietly, the one who had been laughed at and underestimated. That memory kept him grounded, reminding him to stay humble, patient, and connected to the power of passion. Eventually, he realized that his journey was about more than the applause, recognition, or awards. It was about the courage to face fear, the dedication to practice tirelessly, and the ability to express emotions honestly. Music had given him a voice when words were not enough, a confidence when self-doubt loomed, and a way to inspire others without saying a word. The experience transformed him, not just as a musician, but as a person stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever challenges life might bring. Looking back, he understood the value of perseverance. Every moment of ridicule, every doubt, every late night spent practicing had shaped him. The journey had taught him patience, focus, humility, and the importance of believing in oneself. The applause and admiration were wonderful, but the most valuable lessons were the ones he had learned inside himself: the courage to continue, the joy of expressing his passion, and the satisfaction of overcoming fear. The boy continued to play, explore, and grow. His story became an inspiration not only to those who had witnessed his performance, but also to those who would hear about it in the years to come. It was a story of courage, perseverance, and the transformative power of music. He had turned ridicule into respect, fear into confidence, and solitude into strength. And most importantly, he had discovered that talent combined with heart, dedication, and courage could change lives, starting with his own. The talent show was only the beginning. His journey continued, filled with new challenges, opportunities, and experiences. Yet he knew that no matter what happened next, he had already achieved something remarkable. He had found his voice, shared it with the world, and inspired others to believe in themselves. The piano, old and worn as it was, had been his companion, teacher, and guide, helping him transform fear into triumph and silence into applause. As he sat at the piano in his room one evening, fingers moving effortlessly across the keys, he smiled quietly to himself. The music was his story was his, and his courage had proven that the power to overcome obstacles lies within. The boy who had once been laughed at had become a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the beauty of staying true to oneself. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what life brought, he had the strength, the heart, and the music to face it all.